Hello, my name's Sarah Meredith. I go to Christchurch with my husband Rob and our two boys, Joshua, who's 12, and Ben, who's 6. I'm sitting in the house at the moment. It's nice and quiet. I think it's about the 3rd day I've had with no work and no children. So I'm really appreciating that and just trying to kind of recover and get used to life again after all the craziness of lockdown. I've got a few thoughts to share with you today. I've been given Psalm 18 and it's one of my favourite psalms. So first of all, I'll read it for us. And it's a psalm that David sung to the Lord when the Lord delivered him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hands of Saul. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me, the torrents of destruction overwhelmed me, the cords of the grave coiled around me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. I love this psalm for many reasons, and it has brought me great comfort in the last year or so. In the first few verses, David talks of God as his strength, his rock and his refuge. I can really relate to this, particularly in the lockdowns, trying to grapple with homeschool with 2 boys, whilst also physically struggling with long COVID. I'd wake up in the mornings and I'd feel really overwhelmed and fearful, not only for that day and how I was going to physically manage to get through a day of homeschool, and particularly in the first lockdown, trying to manage work as well. But I'd be fearful for the future as well. This passage really reminded me that I couldn't do it in my own strength, but I could do it in his strength. He was and is my strength and rock. The next bit of the passage, David talks about his enemies. And David had armies of enemies, including Saul, seeking to kill him and his people. It made me think, who or what are our enemies? What are the things we struggle with and fear? It could be a person or people we find difficult, or perhaps for many of us in the last year, COVID is our enemy. Later on, David talks about death entangling him and the cords of the grave coiling around him. We get a real sense of David's very real, tangible fear. And as we're in the Lent period at the moment, these words remind me of the anguish and the fear that Jesus felt as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane and how he cried out to his Father. Can we relate to these feelings of fear? I know there's been many times in the last year when I have. So what did David do in his distress? Well, it says, in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to God for help. David cried out. He was desperate for God's presence. He knew that being in God's presence would drive away his fears and bring him peace and protection and the strength that he needed. Finally, at the end, we hear what God did. It says, from his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. God's really been teaching me about the importance of coming to him every day with my fears and worries, to draw close to him and speak out my fears to him. I like the intimacy of this part of the passage. God doesn't just hear his cry went directly into God's ears. It comforts me to know my cries of help don't just fly upwards into some vast area for God to glance at. My cries go directly into God's ears and to his heart too. He longs for us to come to him, as a father longs to hold his child. He wants to hold us and listen to what's upsetting and worrying us. Like David, I find worship songs a really helpful way of connecting with God. I wanted to recommend the song My Beloved by Carrie Job. When I feel overwhelmed, I take 5 minutes to sit quietly and listen to this song, and I imagine God singing these words over me. I'll say a really short prayer for us now. Dear God, as we are in this period of Lent, my prayer for all of us and myself is that we grow closer to you, God, and rely on you for strength when we are weak. I pray that when we feel afraid, we can learn to reach out to you and come to you each day with our fears, and that we will feel comfort that our cries of help go directly to your ears and to your heart, Lord. Amen. Thank you. It's been lovely to be with you today. Bye.